Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the quarterly data quality process for Q4. My name is Alexander Fuller. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see the screen. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started this morning. Everyone is on mute. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please utilize the question module in GoToWebinar to ask. As we go through this, I'll try to keep an eye on it and answer things as we kind of go through. The slides and the webinar will be recorded and available on our data quality help desk articles. So after the presentation, probably later on the day, those will be available to watch and access. Okay, on the agenda this morning, we're going to kind of go over the context for data quality, go over missing values and data issues, child-only entries, utilization, timeliness, go over who participates, the report details, the overview, submission process, the data quality timeline, accessing and reviewing the reports. That'll be done in kind of a live demo of the system. Troubleshooting, and then resources and support. And if time allows, we'll address any additional questions. Okay, for the context, the Chicago Continuum of Care utilizes data-informed approaches to coordinate services and resources in an effort to end homelessness. The Homeless Management Information System, which is HMIS, data quality is important factor to measure efforts to end or prevent homelessness. The COC relies on the work of all providers of all funding types to enter accurate, complete, and timely data to ensure we have the information we need to make informed decisions as a community. So due to the importance on this data, in order to maintain data quality, providers in HMIS are expected to participate in the quarterly data quality process. And this process does address data in the following 4 areas. So missing values, data issues, child-only entries, bid utilization, and then timeliness. So when it comes to the missing values, this would be the first thing that we'll kind of look at. Overall, these are the data elements that are looked at for missing values and data issues. You can see it in the screenshot on the right-hand side. To kind of go through them, it starts off with name, social security number, date of birth. Race and ethnicity is a combined question now. So under race, it'd be all identified as race and ethnicity. Ethnicity is also defined or is no longer included in as a HUD question. It still remains in the data quality report just for spacing and processing purposes, but we'll go a little bit into detail on how those are now being represented in further slides. But gender, veteran status, prior living situation, length of stay in previous place, relationship to head of household, client location, domestic violence, disability at entry and exit, income at entry and exit, non-cash benefit at entry and exit, insurance at entry and exit, and destination. So no more than 5% of clients enrolled in your project can miss any data element, including data not collected answers. So in the screenshot that you see on the right side, it says required for. Be mindful of who's required to have that element completed, because that also plays into the 5% of those particular clients. One thing to note is that name, social security number, and date of birth data elements include client doesn't know and client prefers not to answer as errors. So this is based on how HUD views these particular answers. It still views it as missing data. So in the data quality report, it's set that way as well. So just to kind of go into the race and ethnicity. So both primary race and ethnicity fields were retired and replaced during the 2024 data standard changes. So the race field located in the summary tab A and details tab B have been updated and will now pull in the new race and ethnicity field. And then also for the ethnicity field, it has been marked as retired in the details. And then in the summary, it's going to be represented as 0 errors as the count, and then the error percentage will always be 0. So when you're reviewing the details, you will see that entire column being represented with all retired in red. So you could kind of just ignore that column. Again, this still remains for processing and historical purposes. But overall, the field that you are going to want to identify or correct if need be is the race and ethnicity column. Okay. So next would be child-only entries. There must be 0 child-only entries for your project unless your project does serve unaccompanied youth. So a child-only entry is flagged when a client under the age of 18 is enrolled in a project without being connected to a parent or guardian. This can happen for 2 reasons. One of the main reasons is that the child was entered separately from their parent or guardian. In most cases, the household or the head of household enrolled in the project and then the child enrolled later. And sometimes they're not connected via group ID, and then they're kind of isolated in the project by themselves. The second piece is that the client is just missing a date of birth. So if the client is missing a date of birth, they'll show up as actually 2 errors on this report, one being the date of birth error, and then also with being a child-only entry error. Correcting that will remove them from both. If your project does serve unaccompanied youth, so children or youth under the age of 18, we do ask that you send in the ticket just to make us aware of that so we can make note of that on our end. Before we move forward, are there any questions about anything we went over so far? Okay. So for utilization, bed and unit utilization must be within the following ranges. So for emergency shelter projects, it must be between 80% and then 105%. Transitional housing must be between 80% and 105%. Permanent housing, permanent supportive housing must be between 85% and greater. Safe haven is 85% and 105%. So utilization looks at how many clients were enrolled in your project, which is the housing movement day for the permanent supportive housing projects. On December 14th, 2023, which is the point in time date for this iteration of data quality, as compared to how many bed and units are indicated in your bed and unit inventory. So if your project is over or underutilizing their bed list, but it's in compliance with their unit utilization, then the project will still be considered in compliance. So if the opposite situation is true, where the unit is out of compliance with the bid is, then again, the project will still be considered in compliance. So this is kind of a screenshot of what that section looks like on the summary page of the data quality report. So essentially you have 2 tables on top of each other, one being dedicated to the bed utilization and then one being for the unit utilization. Again, the way that you should think about bed and units is that bed represents individual clients, so one-to-one with the client ID numbers, where unit utilization represents households, so it'd be one-to-one with the group ID number. So depending on how your project is set up and depending on how the clients that you serve, in some cases, one might be out of compliance and the other might be. So if you serve, for the most part, families, in most cases, your unit inventory would be more accurate than your bed inventory in some cases. So as long as your unit inventory is in compliance, then overall utilization will be in compliance for your project. So there is one thing to the utilization table in the report. So previously, the utilization percentage was being overstated due to housing move-in dates prior to their enrollment being included in that utilization percentage. This has been corrected in this quarter's data quality process. So for permanent housing clients, just always keep in mind that they must have a housing move-in date added to their enrollment. That's after the entry, which is the start date and the time. So by default, all dates added to the housing move-in date field in HMIS have a timestamp of 12 p.m. noon. So especially for cases where entry and move-in dates are on the same day, please double check that the entry precedes the move-in time as of day, as well as the date. So an example of that would be is that if I have a client that enrolled in my project December 7th of 2023 at 4:50 p.m. and they also got housed in my project on the same day, the housing move-in date that I would have put in would have been December 7th, 2023, and by default, it would have gotten the 12 p.m. noon timestamp. So in the system, it would appear that the housing move-in date occurred prior to the client being enrolled in your project. If this is a case that you run into, to simply fix this, all you need to do is change the PM in the entry to AM, and that will essentially make the project enrollment before the housing movement date. But again, housing movement dates must be before the client, or must be after the client enrolled in your project. If housing movement dates are prior to that, then they're not going to be included in the report. So next would be timeliness. Timeliness is tracked through an automated report created by Chicago. This timeliness report will track timeliness at entry, at exit, at housing movement date, and for shelter services. So timeliness measures the time it takes to create an element in HMIS. This measure applies even if the entry date is backdated. For instance, if a client originally came into your project on November 1st of 2023, but they were entered into that project in HMIS until November 15th of 2023, that information will still be considered out of compliance as it took 14 days to indicate that the client was enrolled in the project. So timeliness cannot be corrected. It's based on the kind of the metadata of the questions and the enrollment. So that's nothing that you can kind of change in HMIS to rectify any timeliness errors. So who participates? Essentially, all projects are required to participate regardless of funding, so long as the project is active and has at least one client enrolled. So if your project is non-participating, serves a DV client, or doesn't enter data into HMIS for any given reason, your project isn't going to be required to participate because there's nothing to pull out of HMIS for your project. So just to kind of double check, we do have an article that lists all of the projects that are active in the system. So please refer to this to see if your project is required to participate. If your project isn't on this particular article, please reach out to us just to confirm. But again, if your project doesn't enter data into HMIS, you're not required to participate in data quality. So kind of to go over the report details, reports must be generated for one project at a time. So if you have 4 projects at your agency, you should generate 4 data quality reports out of business objects. The reports will be looking at the period between October 1st of 2023 through December 31st of 2023. So Q4 of 2023. In the report, the point in time date is set for December 15th. which in the prompts it indicates the point in time date plus 1 day. So this will actually be looking at clients enrolled on the night of December 14th, which is the actual point in time date for this data quality process. So again, they'll be looking at how many clients enrolled on the night of the 14th against how many bed and units for permanent supportive housing. Again, it has to include the housing moving date. Okay, and for this quarter's overview, kind of just over the process overall, the data quality process will go from February 26th, which is today, to March 8th. There will only be one round for submissions. Providers will not need to send in data quality reports until they are ready for final submission. Business objects reports, which can only be downloaded by users with access to business objects, will cover the following, which is the missing values, child-only entries, and bid utilization. Changes made in HMIS will not generate in business objects until the following day. This is really important to just keep in mind when creating a plan for going through your data quality at your agency. So you want to just make sure you leave yourself enough time towards the end to make sure that changes that you're making in HMIS, you have enough time to run a new report. So if you're working all the way until March 8th to make changes, you're pretty much setting yourself up to not be able to run a report out of business objects that reflect all of the changes that you've made. So any changes that need to be made for your project, please do that by March 7th, just so you have the following day to actually run a report that reflects those changes. The SQL report that's going to be sent out to ATAs is going to cover the timeliness part of it. So again, ATAs are going to receive that via email. They should receive that sometime this week, but we'll send out more communications if anything changes with that. Okay, before we kind of talk through the submission, are there any questions about anything we've covered so far? Okay, we'll just continue. So for the submission process, reports are to be submitted by March 8th, which is the deadline. If you finish prior to March 8th, you can definitely submit before then, but the due date is March 8th, end of day. Files must be renamed using the Chicago DQ underscore 4 dashes underscore year month date template. So to do that, you must adjust the project ID number for the dashes and then replace the year month date placeholder with the actual date before actually submitting to AllChicago. So to do that, once you download the report out of HMIS or out of Business Objects, once it's in your file explorer, you can right click on the file, click rename, and then you'll be able to make those adjustments. If your project is a project where the project ID number is represented by 3 numbers instead of 4, just make sure that you actually put a 0 before, just so that it is 4 digits. So there's 4 dashes in the template here, so you want to make sure that you have a placeholder for each dash. So again, 3 digits, you want to make sure that you put a 0 before. So in my example, I have project 833. And since it's only 3, I put a 0 in front of it. This is also true for the month and the date. So since you'll be submitting reports in February and in January for the month, you just want to make sure that you put either 03 or 02, just to make sure that the format is maintained correctly. So when you get ready to send the reports to AllChicago, make sure that you're sending these reports to the email address, which is dataquality@allchicago.org. This is really important because this is the only way that your data quality reports will get processed and included in the final results. So again, if you're sending your data quality reports to submit via the help desk or via an individual email to someone on the HMIS team, it's not going to get included in as you participated in the data quality process. So make sure you're sending it to the right email address. The subject line must be data quality reports submission attachments. For sending reports to us, you are allowed to include all of the data quality reports for your agency in one email. There's no need to send individual emails per report. So just to kind of clarify the difference is that you must run individual reports out of business objects for your projects, but you can include all of those individual reports in one email to All Chicago. Okay. Kind of before we move on to a next section, I'm just gonna leave a couple of minutes just to ask questions again. Keep in mind that you can ask your questions in the questions section of GoToWebinar. So you should be able to see that module and you can just type in what your question is. Would my date be 12/31/2023? So would you be able to clarify your question just a little bit more? Just not understanding. Oh, okay. So the question that's being asked is that in the previous slide here, where it's mentioning the year month date, this date is essentially the date that you're submitting the file to us or the date that you downloaded it. It should be probably within the range of the data quality process, but it doesn't have to reflect the actual end date of the period that we're looking at in data quality. Okay, so to kind of just quickly go through the timeline, we sent out notifications to kind of go over when the data quality process was going to start. Today is the day of this first day of the data quality process. We're in the webinar currently. So between today and March 7th is the correction period. Again, this is the time where you're going to be able to make those corrections in HMIS and then on the following day, be able to generate a report of those changes. If you wait until March 8th, you will have to wait until March 9th to actually get those changes reflected in the report, and then it'll be past the submission date. There's no date for the final results to be posted, but more than likely it'll be the following week. And then that'll be done at the link that houses all of our data quality results. So that'll also be sent out via an email. And also, I believe it's at the end of this webinar, the slides at the end of this webinar. So we're gonna kind of just go through accessing the report and reviewing it in business objects. So let's do that. Okay, hopefully everyone is able to see my screen, which is business objects, or not business objects, which is community services, the live site. Okay, so we have one question just before we get started. The reporting period is is 10/23 to 12/31. So the reporting period is from October 1st of 2023 to December 31st of 2023. In the actual business objects report, we'll see in just a bit, but the only thing that'll change is that the end date, instead of 12/31/2023, it'll be plus 1 day, which would be January 1st of 2024. So essentially it's the entire quarter of 2020, the entire Q4 of 2023. Okay, so once you're in community services, the way that you'll get to business objects is either at the top right of your screen, which is connect to business objects, or you can do it via the reports section on the left-hand side. So if you're doing it that way, at the very bottom under custom reports, you'll have business objects. If you click on it, it will open a separate window. And if you click folders, it should take you directly to public folders. From there, you can click on Chicago Live folder, Chicago COC reports, secure, and followed by data quality. In this folder, you do have the Chicago DQ underscore dash 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 underscore year month date report. If you want to run the report, you can just click on it and it will begin to open and run. If you want to schedule this report, you can right click on it. It'll bring up a list of prompts here. You can click schedule. And it does give you the ability to schedule these reports on whatever frequency is convenient for you. So if you want to schedule them to be delivered to you every morning, you can set that up as reoccurring, hourly, weekly, however often you want to receive this report, you're able to do that. In our business objects article that goes over the data quality report, it does go over how to set the parameters for this. But for the most part, the prompts are going to be exactly what we'll go through when actually running the report. So if we go back and just click on Chicago DQ report, we'll actually run it in real time. So what's going to pop up is the prompts. So the first prompt is going to ask you to select your provider. This is the section where you're going to only select one project at a time. So in my example, I'm just going to choose project 883, which is our emergency shelter project at All Chicago. The remaining prompts, you shouldn't have to adjust at all. EDA provider should be left at default provider. The start date for this period is October 1st, 2023. The end date is January 1st of 2024 because it includes the plus 1 day from December 31st of 2023. The point in time date is set to December 15th, 2023. Again, it's including the plus 1 day. So our point in time date originally is looking at 12/14 of 2023. The effective date should always be in the future, kind of no matter what report you're running. And it is set that way. So there's really nothing to adjust other than the project that you're running the report for. So once you have that identified, you can just click run. Depending on the size of your project or how many clients your project services, this report could take about a minute or 2 minutes to run, or it can take about 5 to 6 minutes. If you do have a fairly large project, I do recommend that you schedule it just to kind of save yourself some time of watching this load. Okay, so while we're doing this, are there any questions about accessing the report so far or navigating business objects? The ID was only 3 digits. Yeah, so when running the report, you don't have to maintain that naming convention of that you're going to change the file name to. So when you're actually filling out the prompts, you can put in the 3-digit number, or you can type in the actual name of your project, and it'll still populate the project that you're looking for in the prompts. Only time you'll have to maintain that 4-digit naming convention is when you're submitting the report to All Chicago, and that's after you download it and you're adjusting the file name in your File Explorer. So we have another question. Will this be emailed out? So this won't necessarily be emailed out, but it will be available on our help desk, which the links have been emailed out previously. So if you have the links, you should already have the access to where it's gonna land. Okay, we have another question. Should this be the report to run to assist staff making corrections before submission? So yes, this is the only data quality report. So you're gonna run this, and we're getting ready to go through kind of how to interpret a lot of this really quick. But this is what you're gonna use to make corrections. As you're making corrections, you're gonna continuously run this report. The percentages should change, and the goal is to have 0 errors or below 5% for all of the data elements here. Okay, so now that we got the report to run, at the very top, you can see that the day range for the report, you can see that the project that we're running the report for. Below, you can see, again, our data elements that we're looking at. The next column is the required for. This is a very important column just to make sure that errors that you're looking at are actually being counted in this summary tab. So if you're looking at veteran status for children that might be missing a veteran status, is not being counted in the summary tab. So that's not going to be one of the clients in the detail that's going to affect this error percentage changing. Again, one thing to note is that for ethnicity, it's always going to be 0% just because this has been retired. So when we get to the client details section, you'll see in that particular column, it's going to show completely retired. Below the data elements is going to be the summary for the child-only entries. The details of this is going to be represented in tab C. But again, child-only entries is being clients under the age of 18 that are in households by themselves, so they don't have a group ID number with additional household members over the age of 18, or they're missing date of birth in general. And then below is the utilization table. Again, it's kind of broken out into bed utilization and then unit utilization. So essentially the summary tab is the summary of all of the details found in the remaining tabs. The client detail key is kind of worth looking at in terms of trying to understand what the color coding means for certain things. It'll tell the difference between mismatch, HUD verifications, null values, low quality answers such as approximate dates, or clients prefer not to answer, a client doesn't know. And then also when it comes to the actual data elements themselves, this will show you exactly where in the assessment it's located, or if it's located in the client profile. So this is a good way to identify where things are in HMIS to kind of begin making those corrections. So in the client details tab, this is what I think is the most important tab of this all when it comes to making corrections. This is where you'll get all of your information from. Again, the first column here is going to be your group ID number. This is how you're going to identify households that belong together. So as you can see here, the first two clients that pulled in have a group ID number that is exactly the same. This is indicating that these two clients came into the project together. So if you have child-only entries and you look at the group ID number and the child has a different group ID number than everyone else in the household, then that might be something that you will want to fix. The next thing to kind of look at would be the name data quality. If your client is missing a data quality answer for name and is null, that is going to show up in the next column, the name DQ. So that's kind of the only thing that will give this response unless the first or last name doesn't have any text in it, which I don't think is possible to do. So the only thing that would be counted is if the name data quality question isn't completed. It's pretty much the same for the social security number one as well. So if the data quality for social security isn't completed, then you'll get a null value. If you do put a social security number in and you receive an invalid social security number for data quality, then that just means that the number that you put in was either all nines or all zeros, or was kind of like obviously not an accurate social security number. So that's the reason that an invalid social security number will pop up. But other than that, it's based on the data quality question. So if that's complete in any capacity, you should be fine. Okay, so for the date of birth data quality, it's pretty much exactly the same. So if your client is missing a date of birth, then it'll show up as a null. If they're missing the data quality for their date of birth, it'll be a null value as well. So they must have an accurate date of birth added, and then also a date of birth data quality question completed. Okay, so we do have a question. Since HUD doesn't require social security number for eligibility, will All Chicago consider removing it from data quality? I think that is something that we are talking about in future adjusting with data quality. Again, we can't make those changes without other input outside of HMIS. So that is something that's potentially could change in future data quality processes. Okay, so for the race and ethnicity columns, again, ethnicity is completely marked as retired here. And then the race and ethnicity column is going to represent both, race and ethnicity, just as it is in the assessment. So if we kind of jump to a project enrollment really quickly, one thing that has come up that I just kind of want to make mention to is that so right here where you have race and ethnicity, let's say you have a value that well, not necessarily for race and ethnicity, but one thing that I did want to make mention is, let's say you have a value that you want to change and it's no longer with the same with a different value, but it's not changing in the report. So in this instance, I have Asian American, Hispanic, Middle Eastern as being the value for this client. If for whatever reason I want to change that, and it's not changing in the report, that just means that the answer is the same. So I can kind of quickly show you what that example looks like. Okay, so I have this value here, and if for whatever reason the client identified as white and the other race and ethnicities they don't want to identify with, if I change it in HMIS and click save, at this point, now I should have two values on the same date and time. So in most cases, if you run into an issue where values aren't changing in the report, this is usually the issue, is that you have the same start date and the same time with two separate values, and the system kind of doesn't know which one to prioritize or which one is accurate. So in this case, if you're the ATA, you should have access to make these changes no matter the staff that puts it in, as long as they're at your agency. For case manager threes at your agency, they should also have that capability for themselves. But what needs to happen is that you need to actually hit the delete button for the value that no longer is applicable or the incorrect value. That's the only way for this new value to pull into the report. As long as you have a history of conflicting values on the same date and time, is not going to make any changes in the system. Um, that example was for race and ethnicity, but that's essentially for every question, every assessment question. As long as it has a value, it's going to provide a colored bar next to it with that history. So you just want to make sure that you check the history as you're making data corrections. So for gender, again, if you're missing a gender value, it's going to be null. That's kind of the only way to get that null value, is that it's missing completely. Veteran status, again, if it's missing, then it'll have the null value. As I mentioned previously, keep in mind of what questions are required for what clients, because if we're looking at veteran status and we're looking at a child missing veteran status, you can definitely update that in HMIS, which would probably be ideal to do, but it's not going to change the summary or any errors populated in it, because that's only looking at adult clients. So if you change all of the veteran status for the children, but you leave all of the adult veteran statuses alone, you'll still have those same errors. Prior living situation, length of stay. Again, if you're missing prior living situation values, then it's going to show as null. Same as length of stay. One thing that I do want to identify with length of stay is the non-HUD values. So if you have a client that's been in HMIS for some time, let's say around 2015 or around then, it's likely that their length of stay, they might have a length of stay that is no longer an acceptable HUD answer. And since then, they should have had their length of stay updated to an updated answer. But if it still remains an outdated answer, it's going to show up as non-HUD. To correct that, again, you're going to want to make sure that you go into the history of that question, delete the value of the answer that's no longer applicable, and then you're going to want to make sure that you put in whatever the new value is, or whatever the consistent value that HUD or the new HUD value is. So in some cases, just an example, it might say 1 to 6 nights, and that might have just been a custom length of stay answer that was acceptable back in the day or back in at that time. But now it might have changed to 2 to 6 nights. So you'll have to make that correction to whatever the current value is. And then when it comes to relationship to head of household, this is also one thing that I want to mention, is that that's related to the actual assessment question, relationship to head of household. Ideally, every client or every household that enrolls or every enrollment into your project should have a head of household designated. If it's a single client, then that single client would be its own head of household. If it's more than one client in a household, then somebody has to be identified as the head of household. which should be self. There's no case where you can indicate that there's more than one head of household. So if you do have a situation where there's two head of households in a project enrollment, one has to be changed to an additional household member. If for whatever reason, again, if you have like a child only entry and they're not labeled as self, but they're not connected, in most cases, the simplest way to do that is that this is another sample client that I have, and let's say our project started on 12/5/2023, and you can see that there's only 2 clients enrolled here, but my test client, Peter Parker, isn't included. They're out by themselves and they need to be included with this household. What you can do is that you'll go to this project enrollment, you'll click the pencil for the start date, and you'll wait till it finishes processing, and then you'll click this button, include additional household members. From there, you can include the entire household or the additional household member that's kind of left by themselves. Hit continue. Wait for them to populate here at the top, and then save and continue. From there, if they've already had an assessment completed, you can just click the X at the top. No need to scroll to the bottom. But here you can now see that there's 3 clients enrolled. If I go back to my main client, Peter Parker, you can see that they now have 2, might have enrolled them in the wrong project, but now that they should have 2 enrollments. So you can see that this client is now included. And they should have, I chose the wrong project, but essentially this is how you can see how to make those or add additional household members to an existing enrollment. From there, and then you can just go and delete this individual one of the one client by themselves. So that's how you would include those additional household members, and then potentially also fix any relationship to household errors if you've identified them correctly, but they're just not connected to actually show it in the report. Just for the sake of time, just to kind of go over the sub-assessments really quick. Ideally, every sub-assessment has a question before it that asks if they're receiving this particular, or if they either have this particular income or non-cash benefit, or if they're receiving a disability, or if they're receiving insurance, or if they have a disability. So it has a conditional, not a conditional question, but it has a question prior to it that's asking about the sub-assessment that follows it. If for whatever reason those 2 things don't match, it's going to provide a mismatch in that particular column. If they do match, but the HUD verification, so you haven't indicated that the remaining answers aren't applicable to this client, then it's going to show up as HUD verification. That's the same for all of the sub-assessments. They all work the same exact way. For the sub-assessments at exit, the only way that these will populate is if the client is exited from your project. So if they're not exited, they're not going to show in this report, and they're just going to be identified as a dash. Okay, are there any questions before we kind of jump back to the slides and just finish up the kind of the resources and the last couple of things? Okay, so we do have a question. Would a canned report COC APR help with live data quality assessing? I mean, it could potentially help, but in terms of just data quality and this particular process, I just recommend that you focus on this report. Introducing a different report could potentially introduce a different metric of how things are looked at and kind of cause more confusion than it actually helps. Okay, so we have another question. Do you have to put an entry in the other ethnicity section? So for the ethnicity section, you don't have to make any corrections to that section at all. There's no questions in assessments currently or in HMIS that's going to reflect that ethnicity column. Any corrections to race and ethnicity should be done in the race and ethnicity question. Okay, so just to kind of quickly go through troubleshooting again, we have this client details key, which provides kind of context of all of the fields that we're looking at, as well as a description of some of the alerters. So depending on the color or the abbreviation, it'll kind of just give you what that description is. One thing to note is that the name data quality, social security number data quality, and veteran status are the only questions that will be found outside of the enrollment assessment. So for the remaining questions, you will be able to find those in the assessment itself. So resources and user support. So we do have 2 articles on the data quality process. The main data quality process overview article kind of just goes over pretty much all of the elements we're looking at, the timeline, when things are due. The running and interpreting the data quality report is a little bit more detailed in terms of how to interpret the report and then also how to run it, how to schedule it. It does also provide how to submit it and set the file names up and things like that. So I would just refer to both of these articles, and they should be helpful with kind of completing this. Both articles will have a link to the recorded webinar and slides. So no matter what article you click on, you should be able to get both from there. So other helpful links would be the sub-assessment and hub verification article. Again, that has always kind of been the most confusing piece, I think, of data quality is the sub-assessment and hub verification piece. So this article will kind of just help understand how to make sure that they're done correctly in HMIS, and then they should pull into the report accurately as well. Documenting the housing moving date. This is kind of really important when it comes to utilization, especially for permanent supportive housing projects, just because that is a requirement for them to be counted towards utilization. And then relationship to head of household, again, another important measure, just because every enrollment has to have a head of household identified. So this will help you, figure out who's missing and be able to add those things in correctly. Okay, another question, are we deleting previous data entered to reflect current data as entry in real time? Again, so that's a good question. If you are changing data and it is on the same day as incorrect data that was previously entered, then you are going to want to delete that incorrect data. Just because you don't want to have conflicting data on the same date and time. Okay, so for user resources, we do understand that there may be need for further training assistance for users that are new to the process or have forgotten how to process operates. As such, we do offer assistance through the help desk office hours. So you can do that just by sending an email to helpdesk@allchicago.org. With that, all sessions are limited to 30 minutes. This is outside of the typical email exchange. So the team meetings themselves will be 30 minutes. You are allowed to schedule more than one meeting. So don't think that you could just only schedule one and that's your only chance as a 30-minute. Sessions will be done online via Microsoft Teams. So please ensure that Teams is available on your computer prior to the call. Again, so if we have a call scheduled at 1 p.m., don't wait until 1 p.m. to download Microsoft Teams to your computer, just because it eats into the time available to help you correct any data or walk through any questions that you have. We do ask that a ATA or someone with Business Objects access is on the call as well. This is just so it just helps with having that person available to be able to run a report really quick if need be, or uh, just for their context in terms of being able to change data a little bit more uh, at a higher level when it comes to the ATA or things like that. So it's just always best to have someone with that access on the call as well. And then it's also really important that you send over a copy of the report that you generated out of Business Objects um, to the help desk. Uh, is in this section here for the 30-minute call for the office hours. But in terms of just reaching out to the help desk in general, if you're reaching out with a question, just please include the full report, which is all the tabs. Um, when you're just requesting assistance, it just really helps with being able to identify what the error is and kind of what's going on. When we run reports on our end, sometimes it doesn't show us exactly how data appears to you, just based on visibility. So just having your perspective of data is always important to being able to correct things accurately. So we have a couple of minutes left. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask away. We'll stay on the call for an extra few minutes after 12 if need be. But if not, thank you everyone for joining the call today. Again, any questions, please reach out to the help desk and we'll be happy to assist. Thank you. Okay, so we do have a quick question. Would you still have to run the data quality if you did not have any enrollments? So if your project is operational, but for whatever reason during Q4 your project had 0 clients, so um prior to October 1st of 2023, all of the clients in your project was exited out to where there were no clients during the entire Q4, no, you wouldn't have to participate in this quarter of data quality. But if that is the case, I do ask that you reach out to us so we can talk through that. Oh, okay. So you're a new program. So yeah, if you're a new project and you haven't began to operate or serve clients during that time, then no, you wouldn't have to participate in the data quality process. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining. I think that's kind of the end of the questions. So I'm going to end the webinar now. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to helpdesk@allchicago.org. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.